with me. Breathe in me, oh you lovers, breathe in me. Burn in me, oh you lovers, burn in me. Flow together, oh you lovers, flow with me. Stand right.
Hello, welcome to Elemental Castings. My name is T. Thorne Coyle, and I'm happy to announce that this is the inaugural podcast of a new series I'm doing on the classical elements of air, fire, water, earth, and ether or spirit. And each week I hope to bring in as a special guest a magical practitioner from a different tradition. So I hope to have in ceremonialists and heathens, shamans, witches, chaotes, who knows what. And we'll discuss different attributes of the elements and how they work in our magic and in our lives. But before we begin our first podcast on air, in which I have as a guest Ellen Francik, whom I will introduce in a moment, I'd like to just say a few prayers to get us going. So, Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. And I invite the elements of life here and any other gods and god forms that may wish to join the conversation, be welcome.
And I contribute beautiful invocation to the patron of our order, Thoth, who is the Lord of Speech. This is from Liber Israfel by Aleister Crowley. The God who commands is in my mouth. The God of wisdom is in my heart. My tongue is the sanctuary of truth, and a God sitteth upon my lips. My word is accomplished every day, and the desire of my heart realizes itself as that of Ptah when he createth.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
So Ellen Francik has studied the magical arts for 13 years. She is an adept of the open source Order of the Golden Dawn. This order integrates pagan, Buddhist, and Thelemic teachings into the Golden Dawn system. Ellen also practices the craft and has a broad and lifelong interest in esoteric matters. With her partner, David Wiegleb, she is the co-owner of Fields Bookstore in San Francisco. Ellen has a PhD in psycholinguistics and a background as a worship leader in the Unitarian Universalist Church. Ellen, thanks for coming in.
Oh, it's great to be here on your inaugural podcast.
Very happy to be here to talk to you about air and the powers of speech. So, is there anything you want to say about that beautiful invocation you recited for us?
Mm-hmm. It is part of a larger invocation of Thoth, who is, in some very real sense, the patron of magic in the ceremonial tradition, or an important patron of magic. He is the archetype of the holy scribe who creates as he speaks. In the Golden Dawn we say, by names and by images are all powers created and recreated. And there are many, many beautiful invocations to Thoth in the Golden Dawn corpus. This is one we've actually borrowed from the Thelemic material from Crowley. And the nature of this is both an invocation of Thoth and a taking on of the attributes of that god, so that as we become as gods, we may speak with truth and do the work of a god in the world.
So that concept of doing the work of a god in the world is something that's borrowed from ancient Greece, is it not?
Yes, it is. And we can look to the works of the divine Iamblichus and the great chain of being from what we would call the limitless or the zero, or the all that is, what they call the one, into the many. And that, in some sense, you are of the company of a god. There are certain tasks that you are suited to do, that you most effectively carry out in the world, but that you become better able to do that by becoming in tune with your own divine nature, and thereby better able to order that part of creation for which you are responsible.
So in fairy tradition, we call that discovering the work of this god.
Yes.
In Thelema, they often call that coming into alignment with your true will. Mm-hmm. So is that the same? You feel like we're talking about the same thing here?
Oh, yes. Knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, a phrase which was never intended to be taken literally, but it is in very real terms, the same work.
So you talked about the limitless, the great zero, what we in fairy tradition would call the star goddess or God herself.
Nuit, yes.
Nuit. Can you speak a little bit more about how the power of the word enters in from this formless zero, this great all, the fabric of everything? What happens then?
I'm going to read a little more poetry because there's nothing like poetry to invoke air. And this is from the portal rite, the rite that integrates all the elements. Then breathed forth Thoth out of the unutterable abyss, the word. Then stood forth Thoth in the sign of the enterer, on the threshold of the hall of time, as time was born of the eternal. So stood Thoth in the power of the word, giving forth light, while the aeons that were unbegotten unfolded before him. So there's this very real sense that out of the thing that cannot be named, the Tao, the Tao that not be named is not the true Tao. The Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. Out of this incredibly indescribable fullness, by naming, we create. I create as I speak. Abrahadabra. By names and by images are all powers created and recreated. To name, to use the power of air, is to distinguish one thing from another. The minute you give something a name, you have circumscribed it. There are then things it is not. Therefore, the power of air is an edged tool. In our traditions, we ascribe it to the dagger. Other traditions do differently, as we both know.
Yes.
But there is this very real sense of, by choosing your word, you are circumscribing, you are creating, you are giving forth all of creation.
So unpack this for me a little bit, if you will, because obviously the concept of delimiting something, circumscribing something, making it this rather than that makes sense. But I'm hoping you can unpack a little bit what makes that creation. Is not the thing already there, and we are just recognizing something in it? What's this process of creation via word that happens in ceremonial magic and thought?
There's a couple things going on, and to talk about that, I'm actually going to contrast these two parts of my life, the magical and the psycholinguistic. The magical view of the word is as something with inherent power, and we can trace this back lots of places. There are people who believe that their language is sacred, or that there are sacred languages. Iamblichus famously thought that Egyptian was the language of the gods. The Greeks were using the vibratory power of their vowels to bring them to particular ecstatic states. Hebrew is an ancient and modern and rediscovered liturgical language that has also become a civil language. Enochian is an angelically derived or transmitted language. Barbaric Iranian, as you will talk to the Chaots, is a modern constructed language. That vibration has power. If you put it in your body, you'll feel it. Scientifically, in terms of psycholinguistics, there's a sense that, there are lots of languages. And in fact, the thing that I call a chair is called by many other names in many other languages with different vowels, different consonants, and what matters is the agreement between you and me to call that thing a chair. And so that balance between language as pure convention and language as inherently vibrationally important, literally the language of creation because it corresponds to some reality, is the tension in our modern use of language in a magical context. When I put on my magician's hat, I vibrate. I use the words. I use the sacred languages. I use the evocatory tongues, and I see what effect they have in me, because these things live through me, through the way they vibrate in my body, through what I do with them with my voice. There's also the sense of creating my world as I speak. How do I choose my words? How do I describe myself? How do I describe my life? How do I describe the world around me? What do I choose to call attention to? And so yes, things are out there as they are, but the moment we focus our attention on something, And this is where science and magic are in agreement. When we focus our attention on something to describe it, we do, in fact, create it within our conversation.
So there's a lot here about intention and relationship,
Right.
which obviously are key components to magical practice. So ceremonialists come at setting intention and establishing relationship through the power of speech.
Yes.
Would you say that's correct?
Yes.
Whereas other magical practices come more from the ground up. You know, we want relationship with maybe the body or sexuality or emotion. A lot of people work a lot more with emotion, ecstatic states. It seems as though ceremonialists are not quite as focused on that. Is that a good assessment, or is that something that you work to bring in balance? How does that work in your practice?
I would say the place we start is the place of the word, is the place of vibration, is the place of thinking about all the correspondences that there are in the world. If you're a ceremonial magician, you're going to have a really big bookshelf. I can say this from personal experience. Because one of the things you're doing is loading in lots of knowledge about the world so that everything begins to correspond with everything else. This is a very Kabbalistic sort of thing. You know, you do the gematria, the sacred numerology. You think about planetary, zodiacal, elemental attributions. You start to see the signatures of these different forces in, well, here we go, in bud and leaf and flower, but also in each other and in every living and seemingly inanimate thing until the entire universe speaks to you. But you sort of start with the head, and you start with the undifferentiated energy that comes from the heaven, from the crown, from Kether, and you are bringing that into manifestation. It's creation from the unmanifest to the manifest. The challenge for the ceremonialist is to actually get down to earth.
Right. A lot of people stop somewhere around the shoulders.
Right. I mean, and we have a variety of vibratory and energy exercises that are meant to make sure that we physically move the energy through our body, and we map the tree of life to our body, so all those different aspects of ourselves are embodied, but the trick is to actually light that up and not just have it as a pretty picture on your wall.
So how does this map, this signs seen in the world as signatures, how does that help you cook your dinner?
Well, it depends on what I'm doing when I cook my dinner. Part of it is that when I can see the connections between things, I'm no longer so separate. I get out of my own way more. I stop perseverating in the stories about how I think things ought to be. I stop arguing with the universe and losing, which is a lot of what we do with the stories in our heads that run us.
We mythologize.
Yes, we certainly do. And that's one of the toughest things to do. The task of a ceremonialist is in some sense to consciously use words rather than be used by them. How does it help me cook my dinner? Well, if I clear the crap out of the way, I can actually pay attention to cooking dinner.
Right.
I can pay attention to making a decent living. I can pay attention to being in relationship with the people with whom I am sharing this wonderful dinner. I can see that. I can see the connection between the way I cook my dinner and the way that that food came to my table, how it sustains me, how I then go forth into the world and do the work of my particular God.
Thank you for that. It's great. In this process of finding the work of the God you are associated with, what are some of the things you do to uncover that in practice?
First of all, you need to clarify and balance. The work of the Golden Dawn is the outer order of a magical school, basically. You can think of it as Victorian Hogwarts, essentially. And after becoming a member of the order, after getting that initial attunement, you then go through a series of elemental purifications. You immerse yourself in each of the elements. In the portal grade, having tasted all of them, you go back and do it again, you delve very, very deeply into each element. And by doing this over and over and over again, it is the sense of taking things apart and putting them back together stronger than they were before, so that the quintessence may emerge. When you get to the work of the Adeptus Minor, having purified your elements and rectified imbalances as much as you can at that stage, it's a spiral process, you are then in a much better position to begin to listen to your holy guardian angel, to your God self, to that voice that will more reliably connect you with the work of your God. But a lot of it is just getting out of your own way and making sure that you are properly attuned, getting rid of the cruft and becoming stronger. So there are a series of practices to do that.
So do you feel that you have a different relationship with all the elements of your life and with the power of mind and the power of speech than you did 15 years ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What feels most significant to you about that shift? How you go about your day?
I notice more quickly when things are out of balance, and I invoke more quickly when I know I need help. And I notice when I am chronically out of balance in an area. So, for example, if I haven't gotten exercise for a week, I'll really notice that. But not in the way that, anybody might notice it. I can feel the effect on my energy body, so that what Iamblichus has called the agoides soma, the shining ideal body, that spherical energy body that is my body, has certainly been tuned and purified by this work, which has required physical fitness as well as mental work, as well as courting inspiration, as well as following my intuition.
I've certainly found the same thing in my practice. And boy, meditation is a lot easier if I've gotten a lot of exercise.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you give me an early air practice that you might have done? Something simple. What would be something that would help hone your mind, hone your ability to notice speech, that sort of thing?
Okay. Well, there's two things I can think of. First of all is just noticing your breath. There's a variety of breathing practices that are given, and the practice that is given very early on in the Golden Dawn is the fourfold breath, which is a very simple form of pranayama, which is to inhale for 4, retain for 4, exhale for 4, pause for 4. So, and you can, through meditation, think about how these correspond to the parts of your soul, which are a little bit different in ceremonial magic than they are, say, in fairy witchcraft. But the idea of just being aware of your breath, how it moves through the body, this is certainly not unique to ceremonial magic, but it's foundational to be able to have more capacity to move the air, to build the capacity in your torso to actually take a full breath and do something with your air and feel it enlivening your body. It is prana. It is life force.
Right.
There are also practices having to do with, there's practices having to do with speech that we tend to do a little later. An intermediate practice, we're given various vibratory things to do. We vibrate the holy names during the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram or during the middle pillar, and coming into relationship with that practice, learning to let those resonate in your body without either squeaking or overdriving your voice. Just letting that happen in your body also opens you up. And then finally, by the time you get to the portal grade, you're doing things like watching your speech. What is it that I'm saying? Is it right? Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Am I using the pronoun I a lot? What is it I say about the I that I am using? So noticing the breath, vibrating names and being vibrated by them, and attending to right speech are 3 core practices that we use at different points.
Thank you. I want to get back a little bit to liturgy, since word and speech are so central to ceremonial magic, and you have a lot of elaborate and beautiful liturgy that's been passed down over the last 100 years. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the power of that, why it's important to you, how it changes things in you, what it's like to work with that kind of liturgy that a lot of us in other pagan or magical traditions just don't have.
Well, first of all, a lot of it is beautiful. It's poetic. It's wonderful to have these beautiful poetic incantations to use when you need them. But when you're learning the Golden Dawn liturgy, you're doing a couple of things. One is, and this is something I think that gets overlooked, you are actually learning methods for ritual construction. So you are learning things that are modular, into which you can substitute things. If you can do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, with work you can grow that into the greater invoking ritual of the pentagram, and you can actually start to bring in elemental powers as opposed to just clearing your space. With a little extra work, you can turn that into a hexagram ritual and get planetary powers. If you learn to purify and consecrate according to the formula of the Neophyte Hall, then you have a very specific piece of just liturgy you can use to do things with water and incense, and it's there, it's vibrant, it's available to you. If you learn the formula of the Neophyte Hall, in which, in some sense, we purify and consecrate and dedicate a new person into this spiritual path, you also then have a formula that you can consecrate anything with. You can consecrate talismans. So the Golden Dawn is all about giving you a really great toolbox. That said, then there's the virtue of the liturgy itself, and we know psychologically the power of repetition, that you have this beautiful thing. You have, and I'm going to go back to the Neophyte Hall because it is one of the more beautiful rituals of the order, very powerful, and the first thing people encounter. There are all of us in the hall that are embodying different gods, that are envisioning gods who are not embodied by humans, that are envisioning the energy flows in the hall down from the unmanifest, radiating into a cross that enlivens the whole hall. We are envisioning what happens to the aspirant as they are gradually purified and consecrated. Every time we do this, we are, in some sense, taking the aspirant apart, putting him or her back together, taking the elements apart, putting them back together, destroying the universe and recreating it. Every time we do this, it's stronger. Every time we do this, we recreate ourselves. So you have both the power of the depth of energy and attention that you can get from intentionally repeated liturgy that has a lot of visualization attached to it. It's by no means rote. And you have the beauty of these things that then can be used in many contexts.
So you feel that it's the visual part of it that helps keep it from becoming mechanical, because that's the trouble. A lot of people reject set liturgy because it's so easy to fall into mechanistic practice with it. But you're saying it's a container in which then you dive in and all these things open up.
Oh, yeah. If all you are doing is reading the Golden Dawn rituals, you're not getting the Golden Dawn rituals any more than, if you read any of the British traditional witchcraft rituals, you wouldn't get the power of those rituals either. A lot of it is actually not documented, what you do. All the visualizations, they're not documented. And our order has spent a great deal of time on the inner yogas, the inner work, both within each person as they put on a god form, which is a never-ending exploration to put on and assume the power of a god, and to be able to wield that mindfully while still executing a given ritual, script, and intent. You're not going off script, you're not channeling the god spontaneously. You are holding that form, but doing so with that god's perspective and power. So it's tremendously rich. Plus, it's beautiful. It's physically beautiful. The Golden Dawn came about at a time when the Victorian world was just discovering really good pigments. So there's a lot in the Golden Dawn about color, and the Golden Dawn has the gaudiest robes you will ever see. The reds are really red. The oranges are really orange, and flashing colors. You will have red on green, orange on blue, purple on, just to get that sort of slightly hallucinogenic, vibrating quality. Colors. Colors are forces, and the signatures of forces. And the child of the children of forces art thou. I think that's how that goes. So colors also, the visual aspect has as much of an impact in the Golden Dawn system as does the vibration of the word. There are all kinds of vibrations, and the vibration of color is one of them as well. So it's an incredibly, there's the tools, there's the words, there's the incense, there's the wands. It's a real multimedia experience.
So obviously you have to have memorized all of this liturgy.
It helps. Well, next to me here in the studio, I actually have several scripts. Our order publishes booklets. Our goal, at least for certain of the rituals, the big initiatory rituals, which are the neophyte, the neophyte and the portal, definitely, to get as much off book as you can. Compared to the Masons, we're actually a little lax. The Masons, and the Golden Dawn is, in its history, indebted to the Masons. The Masons do require you to get off book, and the more off book you can get, the more powerful the speeches. I have been Hierophant of the Hall. I have run the hall, and one of the things you have to learn to do, and this is why it's a school, you start training people to do this as they move through the grades, is to understand in outline form what's happening. We take refuge. We open the hall. We're going to have all the officers declare what their powers are. We're going to purify and consecrate. We're going to bring the aspirant in. Just in outline, you need to know what happens next. And then there are speeches that are much better delivered if you have them memorized. So within a working lodge, you'll find some compromises, but for the most beautiful and the most initiatory speeches, the more of them you have memorized, the better. That said, in the higher grade rituals, there's a lot of lecturing at people. There's a lot of, and over here, there is a diagram which is very admirable and recondite. It is the elements on the tree, or it is the table of the Olympian spirits, attributed to the planets. And some of it is, the Golden Dawn was basically just giving you lecture notes in the midst of a bunch of these rituals. We have trimmed some of that out, and we certainly don't require people to memorize these as speeches in the same way that we do the initiatory material.
So, was the purpose of those speeches as a pedagogical tool that they were trying to teach?
Yeah, well, at the time, remember, this material was really hard to come by, and it was just being newly synthesized. So the idea is that, when you get to a certain grade, they'll show you this diagram, and this will be revealed to you, and then you can take it away and copy it and study it at your leisure. It's not necessarily the best pedagogical method to just read things at people and expect it to stick. And there is a balance between trying to expose people to things and say, this is part of the work of this grade, and boring them to death in the midst of what would otherwise be a really moving ritual. So different Golden Dawn lodges either include or exclude these more explanatory diagrams as a matter of their own ritual practice.
I mean, there is a power in being introduced to something in a ritual context.
Yes.
Rather than just pulling a book off the shelf and reading it. If you're in the midst of the swirl of ritual energies, it can have a different effect on you if it's done properly.
Right. You might not remember it all.
Right.
But you'll remember it sort of goes here. Oh, yes, I heard this about the qualities of Malkuth and the 4 elements in Malkuth and how that corresponds to the Maltese cross, and this sign is upon the crowns of all the kings of this earth, and what does it mean to be a monarch of earth and to integrate these 4 elements within one being so that spirit may arise. You'll have that memory of having it there, even if you won't unpack all the admirable and recondite details of it.
Well, here we are back at your concept of vibration again. When you first pull a book off the shelf and read this information, there is no vibration.
Right.
But if a vibration has been implanted in you via ritual, then there's more resonance built up over time. Is that correct?
Yeah, and different writers will say that you actually get some effects off the diagrams. Pat Zaleski, who has a couple published books and some unpublished manuscripts on the inner work of the Golden Dawn rituals, will say, yes, we clairvoyantly perceived that when this diagram was presented to the aspirant, a green ray came forth and was implanted on them. But at the very least, you have this heightened sense. That said, one of the things we've done in our redaction of the rituals in the open source order of the Golden Dawn is to make certain things a little more tangible. We use some alchemical diagrams that weren't previously used, and those are very beautiful and otherworldly. We also have some tangible things that we're doing. So the Tetractys of Pythagoras, that 10-stone arrangement, 1, 2, 3, 4 dots in a pyramid that shows things coming forth from the one, is erected stone by stone, line by line, as a model of the universe and another form of the tree of life, as the ancient Greeks might have it, the 10 things coming out of the one. And, that's very tangible. This is a sense of trying to engage as many senses as possible. And one of the differences between our order and the classical order is we know a little bit more about the different ways in which people learn, that they are not just auditory or visual, but also kinesthetic. We try to get more of that in the rituals.
So you've also talked about doing this liturgy and assuming God form. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of bringing the gods into the hall, and maybe a bit about what it's like to assume that God form?
Right.
Because different traditions have, obviously, we're talking about something that's different from full transpossession.
Yes.
Something that some traditions might call more like aspecting. So can you talk about the energy of that and how that fits in with this set liturgy?
Well, there's a couple things going on. One is that the gods represent aspects of the candidate, certainly. So again, in the neophyte hall, in some sense, we not only take them apart elementally, but everybody in there has a role to play representing an embodiment of one aspect of them. There's also the sense that it is a model of the universe. In the neophyte hall, I'll talk about my experience of the neophyte hall and of being Hierophant of that hall. In our version of the rites, we put a form of Horus, Ra Herquit, in the east as the Hierophant. Not all. In fact, I don't know of any other Golden Dawn order that currently does that, but that's the way we do it in our order. And in some sense, he's the focus for the creative energy in the hall. It gets pulled down from the east in a variety of visualizations through the other gods on the dais and is lensed through the Hierophant into the hall to enliven all the other god forms, visible and invisible. So in some sense, the whole hall is the mandala of that particular god. The individual, and so as Hierophant, one of the things I do when I'm setting up the hall is I do some preparation before everyone comes in and set up the visualization, in some sense set up the stations. When people come into the hall, they take their place and put on the god form as it were a robe and enliven it with their own intent. So taking on the balance of Ma'at, the swiftness and ability to stir things into motion of Anubis, the strength of Set, the protective nature of Nephthys, the healing of Isis, the true and magical speech of Thoth. People take these on and embody them, and there is a visualization. The attributes, the robes, the colors all contribute to aspects of the gods that you are feeling and embodying, and you are the material basis for that god to be manifest in the hall. You are not fully taken over. You're still you, but you are acting with the flavor and character of that god. As Hierophant, you have the trick of doing all of that, maintaining all of the visualization, and still managing to pay attention to the script. It's an awful lot, and occasionally it's a good thing that the past Hierophant is there to cue you in case it's like, okay, you're really here on page 3.
Right, right.
And that correspondingly, there are also gods who are officers embodying gods who are silent on the dais, who have no speaking parts, who just help maintain the visualization. They sit there like great statues and help to maintain the integrity of the hall. So one of the challenges of the Golden Dawn is magically learning to walk and chew gum at the same time.
I was going to ask what sort of training you have for creating and holding visualizations.
Yeah. It's part of the work that we put into our education nights. Our lodge has a very active training schedule. I mean, we run the Neophyte Hall once a month. We will do other initiations once a month. We have education night once a month. We have officer training once a month. We have written commentaries that are internal to us on how to do this work, but a lot of it has to do with here's a diagram of what your God looks like. Your God is dressed this way. Your God wears these colors. Step into the form, feel this, maintain this, do this kind of energy circulation, do this kind of breathing. If you're on the dais, you'll be running particular kinds of currents into the hall, usually a heart-centered or Teferet level current. If you're Osiris, you're running a green man form of that current. Everything is kind of provident and earth-based. If you're Tahuti, you'll be running a logos form of that current. Everything is word-based. If you're Rahor Quit, you will be Tiferet in action and maintaining the movement in the hall. So we specifically pay attention to the visualization of Rahor Quit. He's an important god for us, and in some sense the form that our adepts wear on various times, so that visualization is very finely developed, and we have practices internal to the order for that.
So how much of Ellen's personal relationship with the deity enters the hall? Is there room for that, or not so much room for that? There's room for that, and part of it is to take on a ritual role is to have an opportunity to develop a relationship with the deity. If you look back at the classical Golden Dawn, they did quite a bit of typecasting. So, for example, they would tend to typecast women as Hegemon. Hegemon sits in the middle of the hall, wears the form of Ma'at, and basically balances everything. Mercy and severity, light and dark, water and fire, smooths things out, makes things run nicely. Because all women are like that.
Yeah, because all women are like that. And depending on our order is half women, so you get to see how people react to different god forms. There are men that are brilliant at Hegemon. There are women who are brilliant in the form of the Master of Darkness carrying the big sword. It is another kind of balancing to move in turn through all the offices in the hall. There's a training order to move through those offices where you take on larger and larger roles and move different kinds of energies. So what's easy for you? What's hard for you? How can you develop a relationship with Set, the Master of Darkness, with Ma'at, Keeper of the Balance, with Rahor Quit, with Anubis, Apuat, Opener of the Ways, who in his Egyptian mercurial way keeps things moving. Can you be in your body enough to move around the hall? So the way I hold Rahor Quit is going to be different from the way anybody else holds Rahor Quit. Absolutely.
And simultaneously, so you're holding the god differently than someone else will hold the god. And having held and been held by that god, what in you is different the next day or a year later?
I would say, the next day, hopefully what I've done is return that power where it came from. We have a practice called the dedication of merit. Part of our Buddhist practice is to both take refuge at the beginning so that our work is in the service of enlightenment, and to take the power at the end and not hang on to it to inflate our egos, but to say, this belongs to all beings. And I'm one of all beings. So I can remember the strength of Rahor Quit. If I'm doing something technical, I might pull on a little bit of the beakiness of Thoth. Or if I need to move quickly, I might pull on some of the swiftness and almost mercurial movement of a numis, the balance of Ma'at is incredibly important to me. She's a very important force in my life. So there's a sense in being able to call on these gods to, if not doing a full God form assumption, at the very least to be able to touch on that.
Mm-hmm.
I can, you get very good at learning to do it in the car, on BART, a quick breath.
Right.
You might not get the full visualization. It's like, oh yes, solar disk, this color, this feeling in the body, this stance, because you're learning to stand, you're learning to move. What does it feel like to move as that God? Posture is affected, and that's one of the quickest ways to attune to a particular deity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. How do you train your mind right now? Do you have a specific practice that helps you with powers of air? What's your current work around training mind, training speech, doing air work?
Mm-hmm. Actually, one of the things that's been most important to me lately is deepening my meditation work and being able to do without speech. Being able to have more space. And that's also in keeping with the work of an adept whose job is to attain knowledge and conversation. And you can better do that by listening as much as you speak. So, for example, I went to a silent retreat at Spirit Rock a few months ago, which I found to be utterly foundational. Yes, it was out in nature, and nature is wonderful, and nature is pagan, and you could use all the nature sounds to expand your consciousness, but just the ability to sit, the ability not to have to front my personality, when you don't have to talk to anybody else and you're in fact trying to avoid communication, it provides the luxury of, I would say, conscious self-containment. We would move gracefully around each other, but there wasn't unnecessary chatter. So is my speech trustworthy? Is it harmonious? Is it comforting? Is it worth taking to heart? When I speak, I can choose to say things that are like that. And meditation is one way to deepen my practice in that way, so that what I say is necessary and true. That said, the power of invocation is one that moves me when I am in an ecstatic state in more spontaneous group ritual. In craft practice, say, one of the ways that comes through me is spontaneous free verse and invocation. It's as if I see something and I'll just start naming its attributes and repeating and chanting. And so to the extent that I am more clearly receiving that, the bardic impulse can take over, and the ability to attune to that nourishes me. So there's space, the meditation makes space for that to happen.
I find it very interesting that it doesn't seem to matter what the specific practice is. This thing you're describing happens. Because I certainly have found, I obviously speak and write and read for a living at this point.
Yes.
But I've also found that the longer I've engaged in my magical practice and in deep meditation, the more space I have around words, the more ability I have to listen and listen deeply, and the less I actually need to speak. I used to need to speak a lot. I have a lot of that airy quality in me, naturally. And it's been interesting to watch that stretch over time, which is what I hear you saying has happened to you in your practice.
I'm a little more withdrawn. No, I would say careful. It's like, don't need to have the last word there. Nope, that's fine.
Well, and then goes back to the precision you talked about earlier, of how you see the use of the blade as discerning, as separating out this from that, right? That seems like another powerful air quality is the power of silence.
Right.
We often, in the craft at least, we often place the power of silence in the north. We kind of get to it at the end. But then that in turn comes around and informs us in air.
Right.
It's a continuous cycle.
In the Golden Dawn, before you're even on the tree, after you have your neophyte initiation, you're taught 2 signs. Every grade has its sign. And in the neophyte grade, before you get to the elements, you're taught the sign of the enterer, which is a projecting sign, and the sign of silence. Basically, with your body, you are sending out energy. That's the two arms thrust in front as you take a step forward. You've probably seen those illustrations. And then the sign of silence, the sign of Harpocrates, the sign of that god with the fingers to his lips. That's it. And actually, I use that gesture when I catch myself just running off. It's like, nope. The internal dialogue, that can just stop now. Stop. The ability to stop. First learn where the off switch is,
Right.
before you ramp up the on switch.
Right.
There's also the positive use of vibration. We also, you're given things to do other than stopping. You're given the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, which is, throw stars in 4 directions and vibrate appropriate divine names. Grade later, you're given the middle pillar, which seats various divine names within the middle column or middle pillar of the tree of life in your body, from the highest to the lowest. And then, you do energy circulations around that. So there is the sense of being given something to do with your voice that is productive, holy, and attuning.
Is there any example of vibration you can give us here in the studio for a bunch of
Let me...
non-initiates, even though it's maybe above our grade?
Nothing above your grade about it. This is, it's all published. As they say, it's all published and for you to study. Hope I won't blow out the speakers here. Let's be kind to this, because I will be a little louder than usual. This is, when I do the vibratory, now, vibration, what does vibration mean? One of my brothers who has a background in theater, has an essay on vibration, and it's basically resonance. But for those of us who don't have formal voice training, you can think of it as, being relatively strong with your voice, but kind to it as well. Don't overdrive it. You don't want to overdrive the speaker. I've done that in the past. And figure out where it might be in your body. So I'm going to vibrate the middle pillar. I'm going to do 5 God names. I'm going to put 1 in my crown, right above my head. I'm going to put 1 just on the back of my neck. And that will be, let's see, a white sphere, a really almost ultraviolet sphere. I'll put a gold sphere in my heart. I'll put a kind of purplish sphere at my loins, and I'll put a jet black sphere at my feet, and I'm going to be bringing the power down through the middle pillar. Elohim, Eloavirat Shaddai El Chai, Adonai Ha'aretz. Elohim Eloavirat Shaddai El Chai, Adonai Ha'aretz. And I could repeat it multiple times. I could go down the complete tree like that. I could repeat it 3 times each at each sphere, and then 5 times run it quickly, and then 3 times at each sphere, and then run the energy fountaining up and out, spiraling around my body, encompassing me like a cocoon. So all of that can happen. But Eheyeh, I am that I am at the crown. Elohim, the gods, kind of that place at the back of my neck, kind of your third eye projected backwards. Eloah Veda'at at my heart center, gold. Right, sort of the goddess of, let's see, Eloah Veda'at. Out of Da'at, out of that in-between space, comes that knowledge. Shaddai El Chai, Lord of the earth. Adonai, Shaddai El Chai, Lord of life, or sovereign of life. Adonai Ha'aretz, Lord of the earth. So these are Kabbalistic names that correspond to these spheres on the tree of life. And just standing here, I am immediately more centered and more connected to heaven and earth.
So how often do you do that?
It depends. I can go months without doing it. Because at this point, I have more practices than I know what to do with.
Right.
You accrete as you go.
Right.
So I've got a variety of energy circulations I use, but it is one of the foundational practices. It is I would say it's the primary practice that's given early on in the Golden Dawn, so as a means of energy circulation. So earlier in my Golden Dawn career, I did it a lot more.
Were you doing it daily at the beginning?
Oh, yeah. Actually, one of the things we have in our curriculum is there are intense periods of practice of particular things. So when you are given the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you will do it 3 times a day for 30 days and just burn that in. Similarly, you will go through a period of doing the middle pillar 3 times a day for 30 days. When you are in the portal, you will intensely invoke the element of the month 2 to 3 times a day for 30 days. You will do a balanced invocation of all elements for a month. You will invoke earth, air, fire, water for a month each. And then at the end, you'll put them all back together with another balanced invocation and see how that feels. So in our order, we have periods of more and less intense practice that are on top of learning our officer roles, learning whatever rituals need to happen to make the initiations happen.
Great. What's your daily practice like now?
I would say it's fairly basic. I'm in a period of retooling. I have in the past done devotions to Ra-Hoor-Khuit. I have done some planetary work. Currently it's more what you call meditation and soul alignment. If I can do, it's sort of like if I can do one thing, if I'm not sure what else to do, I do that.
Right. Well, is there anything else you want to say about air, about speech, about knowledge before we close?
I would say that the value of looking at knowledge and speech, it is wonderful to collect the poetry. It is wonderful to have these things vibrating in one's body. The trick is to use the power of air as a gateway into the other elements. The trick in the Golden Dawn, as in any ceremonial magic system, is to bring it alive for you. And it is something I would say to any ceremonial magic practitioner who's starting on the path that if you find that one of these practices doesn't work for you, it's probably not you. You'll probably need to keep working at it or go to your teacher and ask for things to help. Many of us have struggled with one or many of these practices, and the trick is to make it come alive. It's not just something on a page.
Do you feel that part of the problem is that we bump up against things in our psychology around them, or is it something else?
Yes, I would say all of that. You can have things that I just don't like because I don't like, I don't like this element, I don't like this structure, or it's just, I don't have a lot of energy right now. How can I move energy if I don't have energy?
Right.
It's like, oh, well, I actually need, my middle pillars will be better if I take a walk every day. My vibration will be better if I actually do some breathing.
Right.
Some of it is just rectifying imbalances. One of the things you notice is this path actually does require you to physically move. If you're throwing pentagrams around, one of the things that we do as an order is we'll all get around and say, okay, everybody get up and show your lesser banishing. And you'll notice that, some people will be very dense, like some people will be very martial. Everyone who's mastered it, however, will be balanced. Someone who's still practicing, their pentagram might be a little wobbly, or they will not be steady on their feet as they try to project the energy.
Right.
And part of that is just learning through practice, where is your body balanced? How can I make this happen? When you're, as your mastery of the pentagram increases, you actually physically become more balanced.
Coming further into right relationship.
Right.
On a lot of different points.
Yeah. It's ultimately less heady than you might think.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Let's take a breath together. And would you like to dedicate the merit of this podcast for us?
I surely will. Because we've done some good together, and we want to share that good with other people and be able to draw on it in the future. May the benefit of this act and all acts be dedicated unto the complete liberation and supreme enlightenment of all beings everywhere, pervading space and time, so mote it be.
So mote it be.
May the benefits of practice, ours and others, come to fruition ultimately and immediately, and we remain in the state of presence. We'll send this off with an ah. Ah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And thank you to everyone for joining us for the first Elemental Castings. And my website, I'm T. Thorne Coyle. My website is thorncoyle.com. That's THORNCOYLE.com.